What's up, guys? Welcome back to Bible with Home with the Duns. Today we're studying 2 Samuel chapter number 3. Let's get started.
Okay, 2 Samuel chapter number 3 is one of those chapters where when you're just trying to read your chapter for the day, it can be confusing because this information, it transitions from one place to another and then back and forth in a way where it kind of confuses you. Now, I want to kind of give you some things just to kind of know where you're at in the geography of this. So David is king. He's got his capital set up in a place called Hebron. So David's king in this one little town, and he's got the tribe of Judah, which was a sizable amount of territory in Israel. He's the king of that one little thing. It would be like us claiming to be the king of America, but really only controlling Mississippi. So it's not a small portion of the land, but it's not the land. Saul had a son. His son was still alive. His son still had an army. His son still had a general who was really the power behind the throne. And they controlled the rest of things. This is a battle between two kingdoms. And so what we have to remember when we're reading through this is where this is a battle between two kingdoms, the difference maker is the fact that in this story, only one of these kingdoms had the blessing of God. And so where you see one, David's side, getting stronger and stronger and stronger, you'll find Saul's son and his side getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Why? Because the story is there's only one king. It's God. He gives the land to whoever he wants. But that doesn't mean that things are going exactly the way they ought to. Remember, David is a man after God's own heart, but he's still just a man and he's not perfect. Now, one of the things that stuck out to Jax and I as we were looking at this is from verses 2 to 5, like David had a lot of wives, right?
Yeah.
What were your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, it seemed kind of typical for kings at that time, but it also reminded me of his son, Solomon, who had like the most wives in history. And so I guess it runs in the family.
You know, there's more truth to that than you realize, because whenever you're reading through this, you'll notice how many wives he had, and he'll talk about all the kids he's having by somebody, and it's mentioning names. I mean, that's mentioned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And listen, he's going to get more wives. All right, so he's having lots of kids, but he's having a lot of different wives. And in this story, I just want you to understand, this is not good. Why? Because David, although king, is still under the authority of the Lord. What does Deuteronomy 17:17 say? Watch this.
It says, he must never acquire many wives for himself so that his heart won't go astray. He must not acquire very large amounts of silver and gold for himself.
All right. So the law back in Deuteronomy was that when you get a king, he should not have a lot of wives. What is David doing here? He is getting a lot of wives. And by the way, understand this, that whatever you kind of start, those who come behind you, they really get good at it. So David had a few wives here, but like Solomon has like 700 wives and 300 concubines. I mean, listen, what David was an amateur at, Solomon became an expert at. And so just remember, the people who are coming behind you and are watching your example, you just be careful what kind of example you're leading. The other side of this is, again, who owns the land? So when you're reading through this, there's a story here where Saul's son, his name is Ishbosheth. I just keep calling him Saul's son because that's easier to say. He and his general get into an argument over the general overstepping his bounds a little bit, okay? And it probably legit happened, and I mean, this is not good. But this general responds, like, look in verse 8. Then Abner became very angry at the words of Ishbosheth, and he said, am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Like, he's aggressively coming back. Can I tell you this from my experience? I am usually the angriest when I'm defending something about me that I know is wrong in the first place. Like, it's okay for me to see it. It's another level of defensiveness when somebody else calls me out on it. This is what's happening here. He was not doing what he ought to do. When he got called out, he just got mad. And you know what he decides to do? He said, I'm going to withdraw all my support and I'm going to give it to David. The general here has a great question. Look in verse 12. Then Abner sent messengers on his behalf to David, saying, "Whose is this land?" Well, do you know the answer to that question? This land belongs to God. But if you keep listening to what Abner said, notice what he keeps saying in that verse. He says, "Make your covenant with me, and indeed my hand shall be with you to bring all Israel to you." So here's the question. Abner asked David, he said, "Who does all this land belong to?" Well, the obvious answer is this is God's land. But who does Abner really think is in charge? He would say, me. He said, "I'll give this land to whoever I think should have it." Because remember, Abner's the one that made Ishbosheth the king in the first place. Now he's saying, "I'm going to take it from you and I'm going to give it to somebody else." I need you to be very careful in life, taking ownership of the things that really belong to God. Because it is still true that pride comes before a fall. I want to just kind of point out one more situation. Abner dies in this story. Abner already killed the brother of David's general. He hadn't forgotten. So while they're in Hebron, Joab lures Abner in there and murders him. And here's what's interesting. You remember a few weeks ago when we were reading through Joshua and Joshua set up the cities of refuge? Do you remember that? What were the cities of refuge?
They were like these cities where if you accidentally killed somebody, then you could go and they would protect you.
So if you were guilty of murder, you could go to that city and you could be safe. Mm-hmm. Hebron was one of those cities. But Hebron is where Joab lures Abner back for killing his brother. He lures him there and he murders him. So, remember in Joshua, remember what they called the family member of the one who would try to kill you if you killed the family member?
The Avenger.
The Avenger, the manslayer. So listen, Hebron is where everybody should have been safe. But Joab became the Avenger, the manslayer, in just the place that should have been safe. Let me ask you this. Is any of this honoring to God?
No.
No. God is setting up David's kingdom and will eventually give us a king of righteousness and peace and perfection. But if anything in this story is trying to tell us that king is not here yet. David is a good man, but he is not the Messiah. He is a good king, but we're waiting on a better king. So this story, with all of its trouble, is pushing us ahead to say, David is great, he's fine, but what we really need is God. What we really need is the Messiah. And so that's where the story's pushing. So just keep watching for Jesus in the story. We'll see you soon. Keep reading.
Bye.
Bye.